Also joining us now is Jitendra Bhargav, former Executive Director of Air India. We also have Professor Aditya Paranche, who is an aerospace expert and he teaches at Monash University. Thank you both of you for joining me on this broadcast. Mr. Bhargav, I was listening to you yesterday and you made several points on the various possibilities and what really this means for Air India and Boeing. But now that the black box has been found, sir, what can we expect in the investigation? How will it proceed? And how are the agencies likely to sort of work on this together?
Black box has been
Okay. Let's go to Professor Paranche now. Paranche, Aditya, you'll also, you were talking about how there is this question of the presence of double engines there, and also if there was adequate amount of thrust, power, lift that could have played an important role in what really happened. 24 hours later, what do you think could be the primary possibility of what really went wrong?
Okay, so I think we have to make a distinction between lift and thrust. In purely technical terms, lift is what helps you keep a certain amount of weight in the air, and thrust is what lets you maintain enough flight speed to keep that weight in the air. I suppose my own assessment so far is largely unchanged. I still think there was reduced thrust on both engines. There is maybe some early evidence to suggest that based purely on the visuals. There was, at least prima facie, no evidence to show that the airplane stalled. I don't think that evidence exists, although as we look at the data from the flight data recorder, that may change. When stalls happen, airplanes tend to drop really quite rapidly. We're looking at the planes having a vertical speed in the range of several thousands of feet per minute. In contrast, if data from the site flight radar 24 is to be believed, they seem to have predicted a descent rate of just over 400 feet per minute once the engines were out. And that is not consistent with stall to the best of my knowledge. What that is consistent with, however, is substantially reduced thrust on both engines and potentially a dual engine out. So that assessment hasn't changed. It's of course provisional, pending the availability of data from the flight data recorder.
Mr. Paranche, also, what does this mean for Air India? This is, of course, a setback to the company. And what does this mean for Boeing as a company? Because this is a company that's already been under scrutiny, but this is also a part of the fleet that was considered amongst the safest. What does this, mean for these two companies and the fact that Indians had started looking at air travel with a lot of promise and hope? Where does that put us now? Okay, Mr. Bhargav is back with us. Let me take a question with him. Mr. Bhargav, now that the black box has been found, sir, and Civil Aviation Minister Rammohan Naidu has also said that this has happened in 28 hours, how critical is this discovery and what happens next?
See, at the moment, people can speculate and say this was a possible cause of accident that took place yesterday. But what the black box does is to prove and establish conclusively as to what is the cause. Since this black box records virtually everything, the altitude, the speed, the conversation that may have taken place between the pilot and the co-pilot or with the ATC, etc., everything gets recorded. Take, for example, the pilot did know what is going wrong with it, and he told the co-pilot, I'm trying to do this to salvage, to fly, to go climb faster and all those kind of things, and then he couldn't do it. So if you get these kind of clues available, much easier. The time span may be less, but you need to get the facts out. So this device is put in the aircraft primarily for this reason. And this recorded thing, whether it's in a fire environment, whether it's on a hard landing, you name it, but this black box survives for as long as 1 year. So you are able to decode it, and it will be decoded by Boeing, will be there, India's regulatory agency, the Air Accident Bureau that we have, the Air India airline, and you get the hard data. So there'll be no room left for speculation as to what was possibly the cause of this accident. Because ultimately, Boeing as a manufacturer is interested in knowing. Air India as an airline involved in accident is also interested in knowing. So let's hope, and the families of people who perished in this flight also want to know as to what caused the accident. So
Mr. Bhargav, go to
the
Professor.
finding of this
Right.
black
Before I
box
go to Professor
and beginning the
Paranche,
process
Mr. Bhargav,
is a major step.
right. Mr. Bhargav, you know, we're all reading about the pilots here, and the pilot, Sumit Sabharwal, was also a very senior, experienced pilot. Does this also mean that whatever happened was beyond somebody who was really experienced in this art?
You know, it's not a question of experience and finding it out. I would go by hard facts. Because nobody would, I would hate to blame whether it's the airline or the Boeing manufacturer or anybody, because repeat the facts. Dreamliner, irrespective of the kind of controversies it went through the initial phase, has had a safety track record that is second to none. This is the first instance of a Dreamliner aircraft being involved in an accident. Pilots, the commander had 8,000 plus hours of flying experience. What do you do about it? And pilots are trained on simulator for virtually every conceivable situation. But here, as we found, takeoff to the crash, matter of minutes. Why it happened? Because visibility is not a factor. Weather was fine. Everything, the aircraft has a good track record. Pilot has a good track record. Now the question is, the accident did take place. So what was the reason for it? And that is where the black box will come in very handy for to be decoded, data available, juxtaposed with previous kind of accident report, and a report conclusively established that this was the possible reason why this aircraft crashed, for remedial measures to be taken.
Thank you, Mr. Bhargav, and do stay with us also, Professor Paranche, do stay with us. The scale of the tragedy that we're talking about, the plane crash in Ahmedabad, something that's unfolding and something that the country is witnessing is massive, and one cannot really stop thinking about not just lives of those that are lost in the aircraft, but also of those who were present at the mess where the plane crashed. Now, 250 lives lost, in fact, over 250 lives lost, and several families now in mourning. Let's get you some reactions from family members and those related to victims here.
हमारे साथ डॉक्टर नवीन हैं और जिनके ब्रदर इन लॉ फ्लाइट पे थे और उनका 8 महीने का जो बच्चा है उसने सैंपल दिया है, उनको ये लेके आए थे. क्या कैसे आपको पता चला और क्या ये पूरा हादसा हुआ, जरा अगर बताना चाहेंगे.
सर, हमको तो न्यूज़ के थ्रू ही पता लगा इस हादसे के बारे में, और बस बाकी तो सबको पता ही है सर, जो हुआ वो.
नहीं, जैसे कि आप बता रहे हैं उनकी वाइफ और बच्चे यहाँ थे, वो आगे गए, इस तरीके की बात समझ में आ रही है.
जी सर, वो उनकी फ़्लाइट अगले हफ्ते थी और वो इस हफ्ते उनका मतलब जाने का था, उनके हस्बैंड का. तो बस यहाँ ड्रॉप करने आए हम और विद इन फ्यू मिनट्स पता लगा कि ये हादसा हुआ.
उनका नाम बताएंगे?
मोहम्मद अदनान.
मोहम्मद अदनान जी पहले जाने वाले थे, उसके बाद वाइफ और बच्चा जाने वाला था और आपने उन्हें ड्रॉप किया था.
मैं मतलब फैमिली वाले आए थे ड्रॉप करने.
Professor Paranche, one thing that everyone seems to be really curious about is how did the aircraft lose altitude so rapidly? And there's this flight data that also shows that the plane lost signal at just 625 feet. What really could have happened? Was the takeoff, wrong, or in the sense, was there a problem after that? And also about the configurations that people have been talking about. What is it that you pick up from what you saw?
So going purely on the video now, it's a little speculative. So I hope my fellow collaborator engages me a little more here and just entertains it. First off, the fact that the plane took off. These planes typically take off at speeds between 150 and 160 knots. And again, from Flight Radar 24, we see that the plane got to a barometric altitude of about 625 feet, which is about 400 odd feet above the ground level. And at that point, the flight speed was about 170 knots. So the plane accelerated, it gained altitude, which means at the time of liftoff, most likely there was adequate thrust and the airplane was configured correctly in terms of the flap settings and such. Otherwise, the plane would not have been able to lift off the ground. Now, after that, in the second part of this flight, where we probably had an engine failure, most likely dual, because there's a good reason to believe it wasn't a single engine failure, just looking at the rudder on the way when the plane starts to go down. Based on the fact that we had a dual engine failure, the airplane starts to descend at around 475 feet per minute. This is probably a little more consistent with a glide or a powered glide as compared to a stall. So that is the segment that makes me believe that we have a case of engine failure. It's not a stall. It doesn't look like there was any issue with the flaps. So I probably wouldn't worry too much about it. Of course, as my colleague said, from Air India, we will obviously get the black box in our hands soon, and hopefully we'll be able to find out what actually went wrong. But at this point, purely as a matter of conjecture, it looks like a case of engine out. Now, as to why the engines went out or why they idled when they shouldn't have, that is very difficult to tell based purely on the videos, because the videos just show you the motion of the airplane, and that motion can let you talk a little more with some amount of certainty about the forces on the airplane. They can't let you talk about the systems. So if we did have engine out problems, it's very hard to say why the engines went out. Engines can go out for a number of reasons. You can have compressor surge, you can have engine flame out, you can have choked fuel lines, you can have problems with the pumps that feed fuel into the engine, any number of possibilities. But it's only when we look at the flight data recorder that we'll be able to tell exactly which of these went wrong. It's not possible to speculate intelligently about it based purely on the videos.
Right. Stay with us, Professor Paranche, also Mr. Bhargav. We are joined by Tripti Sony now. Tripti Sony is somebody who lost her brother Swapnil Sony and her two sisters-in-law in the tragedy that happened yesterday. Her sisters-in-law Yoga Sony and Alpa Sony also died in that tragic air crash yesterday. Thank you, Tripti, for speaking to us at a time like this. NDTV stands with you at this hour of grief. You lost your younger brother and two sisters-in-law in this tragedy. Can you tell us a little bit about when was the last time you spoke to them, and when did you get to know about this crash?
I lost my younger brother Swapnil and my bhabhi Yoga and my elder bhabhi, and last I spoke to them when they were on their route to airport. They were very excited to go to London. They were to receive my elder brother there, who was on the road trip from Ahmedabad to London since last 2.5 months. He was driving 22,000 kilometers, 22 countries crossing, and he was to reach London. So these people were going to receive him in London. So they were quite excited, and unfortunately they couldn't meet.
So Tripti, it is in some ways so ironic that it should have been interesting at this point of time. There could have been a celebration at your house. Your eldest brother has accomplished this challenge of a road trip to London that you're talking about. How is the family coping with this tragedy?
We are a big joint family. We all are close together. But first, the news was quite devastating. And first, our reaction that, that passengers, since we are told that passengers were being carried to, civil hospitals. So we were hoping that our, people would be there among those injured people only. But then at the end of the day, we lost all the hope, and we were told that, nobody survived. And it was so greatly shocking for all of us.
I know this is a difficult time for you. Tell us a little bit about your brother, your bhabis. Yours seems to be a deeply close-knit family. What is it that you remember about them the most, or you would miss about them the most?
My younger brother was a very bright chap. He was a managing director of a big company called IRM Offshore. And he had just assumed his managing directorship 3 months ago. And he was quite promising entrepreneur. My bhabhi was also a very creative person. Both the bhabis were a very creative person. And, it's a great loss, not just to the family, but for our company as well. And he was absolutely, brilliant chap at the age of 45. I have no words to say.
We're very sorry for your loss, Tripti. Also, your brother's children and your parents. How are the young people and the older members of the family coping with this?
Yeah, this brother is survived by two sons. One is 18 years and one is 8 years old, and we are taking care of them.
Right. Going back to our guest, thank you, Tripti Sony, for speaking to us at a time like this. Mr. Bhargav, you just heard one of the relatives of the victims here. You've been in this industry for such a long time, sir. When do you last remember something so tragic like this happening in this country?
Let me put it this way. Air India has not had this accident as long as I was with Air India. But I've personally gone through a train accident. So I can relate myself to what these people have been going through and what the loss means to them. I was a lucky survivor, it's a different matter at that time. But when you look at it, the painful, everybody has a story, painful story on what happened. Because imagine the people who had come to see off their relatives. They would have hardly gone a distance, some distance away, when they heard the news about the accident. And then, of course, yesterday, nobody had come forth to say, look, people have perished, so many one. We only knew about one survivor, but nobody had put a firm kind of a thing that, look, people have perished. It's only now when the people are getting on to it, the DNA test being conducted because of the fire. Of course, everybody knew it, that the chances of survival were remote. But then one is always hopeful. And that even I was. But till today, when we started getting those figures, that we are talking of 241 people having perished in the air crash and 24 people in the ground, making a tally of 265. Simply unbelievable. Simply can't look at it and say, what kind of a thing has happened suddenly of it? And when you look back here, aircraft, good. Visibility there, pilot here. But what is it that happened? And that is why when these news broke that the black box has been discovered and the process will begin in right earnest, that one said, okay, let's hope facts come out and people can really know what really happened. Because fortunate part is the government has taken cognizance of it and they have issued certain directions that let for these aircraft, Dreamliner flight, operated flights, additional checks be conducted. Probably this may be a confidence booster, will infuse confidence in the traveling public that aircraft per se had no fault, but we are trying to find out the reality, what happened for it. But in the meantime, additional checks are being introduced.
Mr. Bhargav, do stay with us. Let me also get you more reactions from families. Remember, this is a difficult time for them. There's also the story of a daughter from Gujarat who left for London yesterday. In fact, she was to reach London today. Kinel Mistri has died in the crash. Her father spoke to NDTV, and there's also a last video of Kinel Mistri waving goodbye to her parents. And she was in India for medical treatment. Her father spoke to NDTV, and this is what he said.
आपने अभी डीएनए सैंपल दिया है, कौन था आपका फ्लाइट में?
मेरी डॉटर थी।
क्या नाम है उनका?
किनल मिस्त्री।
क्या बताया जा रहा है और कहाँ जा रहे थे, कुछ अगर शेयर कर पाएंगे?
वो आनंद से लंदन जा रही थी, अहमदाबाद से लंदन।
अच्छा, अहमदाबाद आनंद से आए थे आप आनंद से हैं?
आनंद से।
अच्छा, क्यों क्या मकसद से जा रहे थे, कुछ बता पाएंगे?
वो उधर ही रहती थी, लंदन 1 साल से थी वो।
अच्छा,
वो वर्क परमिट में गई थी, उधर ही रहती थी और उसका अगले साल एक्सीडेंट हो गया था इंडिया में ही। फिर उसका वर्क परमिट था, उसको जाना ही पड़ता था, तो उसका ट्रीटमेंट पूरा नहीं हुआ था, तो ये ट्रीटमेंट के लिए वापस आई थी। उसका 7 या 8 टीथ निकल गया था।
अच्छा,
तो इम्प्लांट करवाया, तो पूरा दांत उसका नया लगवाया था।
क्या बता रहे हैं कुछ? अभी आपने सैंपल दिया है
या 3 दिन लगेगा ऐसा बोले, 72 घंटा लगेगा।
तो खाली वो थे, मतलब मैरिड थी, किस तरीके का?
तो आप मैरिड की रजिस्टर करके गई थी। मैरिज तो उसका अगले साल करने का था, मैरिज नहीं हुआ था, मैरिज करने का था अगले साल।
So heartbreaking visuals and voices of families who are mourning their dead. Aditya Paranche, there's a very basic question that I want to ask you for viewers who are just tuning in now. Could the crash have been prevented? And if yes, what should we have done? And what is needed to be done in future?
Yeah, at this point, there is no good answer. We'll only know after we look at the data from the flight data recorder. Look, if I can just tell the viewers a little bit about what might transpire after this, now that we have the FDR and the CVR, they'll try and carry out what is called as a root cause analysis. So they'll try and trace back the errors to whether it's some human pilot error or whether it's a problem with the design, with the maintenance, with the operation, with loading or any such thing. At this point, it's not clear what has happened. And if they do identify, so there are two things they can identify. It could be a random error where nothing much really can be done. Or they could identify a specific lapse in the procedure, at which point they'll have to go back and re-emphasize the value of that specific procedure. If something is found wanting in the SOPs, those will probably be rewritten. So the whole idea of this exercise of looking at the FDR and the CVR is really to understand is something missing in our procedure, is something wrong with the design, and how best can these be fixed. Having said that, I want to add this caveat that at this point, just having seen the visuals, it's not clear where the problem seems to have occurred. So some of it is speculative really, but once you look at the data from the FDR and the CVR, we'll hopefully be able to trace it back to its root cause. And if there are any lessons to be learned, we'll hopefully learn them, we'll improve our SOPs, and that's the way we do justice to the people who died in this crash and on the ground.
Right. Also, Professor, how important are these pre-flight checks, checking for readiness of staff members, also the communication with the ATC systems, also the emergency response protocols? How important are these? Do you think that there could have been lapses on that front as well?
So all of these are absolutely critical. Given how safety critical aviation generally is, we tend to leave nothing to chance. There's literally an SOP for everything, right from the way in which the airplane is loaded, to the amount of fuel that's put on board, to the way the engine is configured prior to takeoff based on the maximum takeoff weight and the ambient conditions, to the exact procedure that the pilots follow from the time the airplane is pushed back. So this sector is heavily procedure driven, and the more experienced a pilot is, the better aware they are of these procedures. As Mr. Bhargav also pointed out earlier, pilots are trained to handle a large range of contingencies. There I could add that even if there had been, for example, a one engine out situation, pilots are trained to keep the airplane flying with one engine and then come back and carry out a safe landing. That's how the airplanes are configured. However, if something's happened which was completely unexpected, completely unsalvageable, then it could have done either. Now, Air India, in our limited knowledge, has had an impeccable record when it comes to maintenance, safety, and operations. So we have to bear that in mind, and we then have to look at the fact that something extremely unusual has happened here. So it might just be an unfortunate set of circumstances, random circumstances that really had nothing to do with any procedural lapse. That's also a possibility that we have to be open to.
Right. Dr. Aditya, there's also a lot that's being talked about this lone survivor, and there are many questions regarding his miraculous escape. And, people have reached out to him, also say that, he himself is not able to talk about, it's understandable that he's gone through this tragedy and he's also injured. What do you think would have really, it's easy to say, it's easy to call it a miracle, and it possibly is, but what do you think could have happened? What really do you think would have helped him?
There is no reason to believe anything in particular. Look, he was sitting in seat 11A, which is by the window. If I remember the seat number correctly, it's the exit row window by the door. So if at all there was an impact on the left-hand side of the airplane, he's bang in there to receive it. Nobody else survived, apparently, this crash, which means everybody in the same row as him, people right behind him, they all perished. So we may not have to call it a miracle, but it could just be a set of chance events that led to him surviving this. Occasionally, people who survive accidents of this sort, where a lot of others are killed, suffer from something known as survivor's guilt. And I genuinely hope that this person does not. He's got a second chance at a life, and wish him the best and hope he makes the most of it. But really, such survival cases are really random events, and these have to be appreciated. We can't explain these, but these really need to be appreciated.
Very well said. Do stay with us, Professor Paranche. Gitanjali Nangtoi is the sister of a crew member who lost her life in the tragedy that happened yesterday. In fact, she also spoke about, she gave an interview in 2023 last week of February, and she joined in April 2023 is what Gitanjali talked about her sister. And she said that, it is very difficult for the family to believe that her sister is no longer alive. And she also said that it was her first job, and she cracked the Air India interview, and it was a dream to become an air hostess. And because of an internet ban in the state of Manipur, the family could not video chat as they would love to, but she had messaged the sister when she was in school, informing that she would be flying to London on that day, but then she became unreachable. Let's listen into that conversation.
My interview sa 23 February ni last week lang interview ni ba aduduga joining na April da to boy da April date fix ai haibu di ka oi haibu ngam je aduga adudagi join to ina mase to yo pass de mase yo da awara ga DM commerce da pass em exam piram maga pass try shuma je ai try to ke sikana haibu ne ba adi ha mahan aviation ko to ana iske no satte ba sinda chatte ba adu interview of look in hire ga adu pass try da ma ke join to boy net thingdring among the koi pa sik na ko se ko le me ba adu video call da pang di question na adu matung di phone call su duga e samli kana to tre ba aduga masi message thar ko se mana ai London chatui ne ngasi do loi call to su chaloi ko ne na chadi da tin ma halakani hai ba ai okay di ko ne ja kana founder se ha de ki kem haina ki trebe bai ni se aduga si ki pau na khoi kom cha mana pau pa de mo khoi di ne ja ba ni na smaina e bi da thagal le yar india ki ten ma kan to wai nga ki ten no karam ban won hai ba na ma fi yar india ni hai ana ma ti London ne ma ai won se sara mi ha ba so to me no te ki London ni hai ba ko ma khat na ko ma se pau lo na ba ne ba ma ki roommate ke se ai number we shin ki ba ki number lai da ba mama na ba mi phone to ba ne ai ki Mumbai de ki pare na kai di pare no khang da ba da kan tham oi hai ba ki si pau ne ba ado sai de media to na me a ya na ba ta ho je ba ko ju adu se company ga koi na pi to ra pau phung na ba da mo koi su kriu gi na to nga na pe na to nga na su hai dai na adu mai ha da mama na bin su ju phone to ro pa da company de ai ki number de pi gre phone to ni de hai su ju mau to ro pi ba ko adu mai ki phone su ba ring chat le ba message sa ba de na to we ga ma gi net su phone to we adu khang kya ta de
The families of victims quite shaken there. Aditya Paranche, this is also the first fatal crash of a Boeing 787. What kind of implications does this have for Boeing's safety records, and also the fact that it was seen as one of the safest aircrafts, the Dreamliner? And what does this mean for the need for maintenance and also Air India's operational oversight?
Okay, so I'm not really an expert to comment on that, but let me still give it a go. So we talked earlier about the root cause analysis that's going to happen now that we have the FTR and the CVR. So the implications for both Boeing and Air India really depend on the outcomes of that root cause analysis. If it's traced back to something in the design, it's something that Boeing's going to have to fix if it's traced back to design. Let's also be aware that some of these problems happen because of issues with the operations that are so niche, it's very difficult to predict them ahead of time. And those are lessons that as a respectable OEM, Boeing will obviously learn. If the root cause analysis finds issues with any of the SOPs or anything to do with maintenance, then that's for Air India to decide how best they're going to handle it. I think the important thing to bear in mind is that both of these companies have had a fairly respectable record over the years. The Boeing 787 has been, they recently flew their billionth passenger over, I believe, some 5 million hours or so without incident. So clearly it's a fairly safe plane. However, one point that I must emphasize here is that in engineering, we talk about reliability, and reliability is always quantified in terms of the probability of failure. Even things that are fail-safe technically carry an extremely small probability of failure, and those are random events that can happen. The second thing I should also point out is that there is a general saying in the aviation world that no accident happens because of a single factor. It's very rare. Instead, you have a chain of contributing factors. So what will have to be identified with this crash was, what chain was this? Were there multiple contributing factors, each of which perhaps small in its own right, that contributed to this? Or was this a chance event, Murphy's law in action, that contributed to the crash? I think that's where we really need the FTR and the CVR to tell us what happened.
Right, that's a very important point. Also, let me also tell you the story of Bhumi Chauhan, a resident of Gujarat's Bharuch, who missed yesterday's flight AI 171, which crashed and 241 people on board died, including crew members, and lost their lives. But Bhumi Chauhan missed the flight because she was stuck in a traffic jam, and that really turned out to be a lifesaver. She spoke today, and this is what she said.
मेरी फ़्लाइट का टाइम था 1:10 का, तो हमें पहुंचते थोड़ा 12:20 हो चुकी थी और 12:10 को एयर इंडिया वालों ने चेक इन और सब कुछ करना बंद कर दिया था। अहमदाबाद का थोड़ा ट्रैफिक, हम लोग ये सिटी एरिया में थोड़ा एंटर हो चुके थे, तो उस वजह से थोड़ा हमको लेट हुआ था। और एट द टाइम आई वॉज फीलिंग टोटली नम एंड एक तरह से अच्छा मैं अपने भगवान का थोड़ा माता जी का और सब शुक्रिया कर रही थी कि मैं बच गई, लेकिन दूसरी साइड ये भी था कि ये जो इंसिडेंट हुआ है वो बहुत ही थोड़ा टेरिफाइड है।
Well, NDTV stands with the families that have lost their loved ones in this horrible air crash. It's time for a short break. We'll be back in just a bit.